The year is 1893, and a young woman in her 20s named Mary is on a train approaching the terminal station of Jackson Park in Chicago. In the middle of one of the greatest expositions in human history, she eagerly walks off the train, clutching a letter she had received weeks earlier. The letter speaks of free room and board, steady wages, and work at a grand hotel during the World's Fair. Millions of people are flooding into Chicago, and opportunities like this are rare. But this isn't just any job offer. It's a trap. And the man who wrote it isn't just any employer. He's about to become one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. When we think of dangerous outlaws terrorizing innocent people in the 1890s, we usually picture Wild West bandits, men on horseback with six-shooters, robbing trains and causing mayhem across the frontier. Hollywood has painted this image so vividly that it's become our default understanding of American crime in that period. Yet the most prolific killer of the 1890s wasn't a cowboy at all. In fact, he was a charming doctor in downtown Chicago, operating what appeared to be a respectable hotel and pharmacy. While legendary outlaws like Butch Cassidy were making headlines for their daring heists, this man was quietly luring victims into his custom-built murder castle, just blocks away from where families were enjoying the world's Columbian Exposition. The year 1893 was supposed to be Chicago's moment to shine. The World's Fair had transformed the city into a gleaming showcase of progress and innovation. Millions of visitors poured in from across the country and around the world. The fairgrounds sparkled with electric lights, a revolutionary wonder that most people had never seen before. Grand pavilions displayed the latest technological marvels. The Ferris wheel, invented specifically for this fair, lifted passengers 250 feet into the air for breathtaking views of the city and Lake Michigan. But just 3 miles away from all this celebration and wonder, something much darker was unfolding. At 63rd and Wallace Street stood an imposing 3-story building that locals had nicknamed the Castle. From the outside, it looked impressive, even elegant. The brick facade was decorated with ornate battlements that gave it a medieval appearance. Bay windows jutted out from the walls, though they were mysteriously covered with sheet metal. The building stretched nearly an entire city block, housing a pharmacy, restaurants, and what appeared to be a hotel on the upper floors. The owner was a man who went by Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, though that wasn't his real name either. He was tall, well-dressed, and possessed the kind of charm that made people trust him instantly. He had piercing blue eyes and a confident smile that never seemed to fade. Women found him particularly captivating. He spoke with authority about medicine and business, and he seemed to have money when so many others were struggling through economic hard times. Holmes had arrived in Chicago in 1886, just as the city was beginning its preparations for the World's Fair. He talked his way into a job at a pharmacy owned by an elderly woman named Mrs. Holton. Before long, he had convinced her to let him buy the business on credit. Mrs. Holton soon disappeared, and Holmes claimed she had moved to California. No one ever heard from her again, but Holmes continued operating the pharmacy as if nothing had happened. With the pharmacy as his foundation, Holmes began an ambitious construction project. He hired different contractors for different parts of the building, switching crews frequently and paying in cash when he paid at all. Many workers quit in frustration, complaining that his demands made no sense. He wanted doorways that led to brick walls, staircases that went nowhere, rooms with no windows and no apparent purpose. What none of these workers realized was that Holmes wasn't just building a hotel. He was designing a machine for murder. Every strange architectural choice had a purpose. The maze-like layout would confuse victims and prevent them from finding their way out. The soundproof rooms would muffle screams. The gas lines he personally installed could be controlled from his office, allowing him to suffocate guests at will. The basement was perhaps the most horrifying part of his creation. Holmes had it excavated to extend beyond the building's footprint, stretching under the sidewalks. He installed a crematorium, claiming it was for disposing of medical waste from his pharmacy. He dug pits and filled them with quicklime, explaining to curious workers that he needed them for processing animal remains from his dissection classes. He built acid vats and installed a complex ventilation system that could clear away smoke and odors. As the World's Fair approached, Holmes ramped up his operations. He placed ads in newspapers across the country, offering employment opportunities for young women willing to relocate to Chicago. The jobs sounded perfect for the era, working in a modern hotel with all the latest conveniences, serving the distinguished guests who would be visiting for the fair. Many of the women who responded were farm girls from small towns, eager for adventure and independence in the big city. When these women arrived at Holmes's castle, they found exactly what he had promised, at least initially. The building was impressive, the accommodations seemed comfortable, and Holmes himself was the perfect gentleman. He was attentive without being forward, professional yet personable. He made each woman feel special, chosen for her particular talents and charm. But Holmes had established rules that seemed reasonable at first, but served his darker purposes. Employees were required to take out life insurance policies, with Holmes helping them through the process and often paying the premiums himself. He explained that this was a benefit he provided, protecting his workers and their families. What he didn't mention was that he was also the beneficiary. New employees were given rooms on the upper floors of the castle, in areas that Holmes could control completely. He told them this was for their safety and convenience, keeping them close to their work and away from the rougher elements of the city. The rooms had gas lines for heating and lighting, all controlled by valves in Holmes's office. Many rooms had no windows, which Holmes explained was to maintain privacy and quiet for his hardworking staff. The building's layout was so confusing that new residents often got lost trying to find their way around. Holmes would personally give tours, showing each person the specific routes they should take to reach their rooms and work areas. He discouraged exploration, claiming that some areas were still under construction or contained dangerous chemicals from his pharmacy operations. Holmes had also installed an elaborate alarm system throughout the building. Pressure plates under floorboards and hidden switches on doors would alert him whenever someone was moving through areas where they weren't supposed to be. He told residents this was a security measure to protect against burglars, but it actually allowed him to monitor everyone's movements at all times. The system was so sophisticated that Holmes could track exactly where each person was in the building at any given moment. If someone tried to leave their assigned area, bells would ring in his office. If they attempted to exit the building without permission, he would know immediately. What appeared to be a modern convenience was actually an elaborate trap, designed to give him complete control over everyone inside his castle. As 1893 progressed and the World's Fair drew millions of visitors to Chicago, Holmes's operations reached their peak efficiency. The contrast between the celebration happening just miles away and the horror unfolding in his building couldn't have been more stark. The fairgrounds buzzed with excitement as families marveled at the latest inventions, but Holmes was perfecting an invention of his own, one that would never be displayed in any exhibition hall. His castle had become a sophisticated killing machine, and he was about to demonstrate just how efficiently it could operate. The first victims were often the young women who had answered his employment advertisements. They would arrive full of hope, carrying small suitcases and letters from home. Holmes would greet them personally, his charm immediately putting them at ease. He had a way of making each woman feel like she was exactly what he had been looking for, that her particular skills and background made her perfect for the position. These women would settle into their rooms, write letters home describing their good fortune, and begin their new lives in the big city. But within days or weeks, something would change. Holmes would find reasons to be dissatisfied with their work. He would claim they had violated some rule or policy. Sometimes he would accuse them of theft or inappropriate behavior with guests. The confrontations always happened in private, usually in Holmes's office on the third floor, or in one of the soundproof rooms he had specifically designed for these encounters. The women would enter these meetings expecting to discuss their employment, perhaps to receive a warning or face termination. They had no way of knowing they were walking into a death trap. Holmes had multiple methods at his disposal. Some rooms were equipped with gas lines that he could activate from his office, slowly filling the space with deadly fumes, while the victim remained locked inside. Other rooms were completely airtight, designed to suffocate occupants through oxygen deprivation. The steel vault on the third floor was particularly effective for this purpose. Its asbestos-lined walls making it both soundproof and escape-proof for victims who proved more difficult to subdue. Holmes had installed a network of chutes and secret passages throughout the building. A person could be pushed down a laundry chute and end up in a sealed room between floors, trapped and unable to call for help. The dumbwaiter that connected the third floor directly to the basement could transport a body without anyone else in the building knowing what had happened. Once a victim was dead, Holmes's system became even more methodical. The basement crematorium would dispose of most remains, while the quicklime pits could dissolve flesh and soft tissue. Anything that couldn't be burned or dissolved would be dissolved in the acid vats he had installed. The ventilation system he had built would clear away smoke and odors, ensuring that other residents and visitors noticed nothing unusual. But Holmes wasn't content with simply killing his victims. He had studied medicine and understood anatomy, and he saw an opportunity to profit from death in ways that went beyond life insurance payouts. He would strip flesh from bones and articulate skeletons, then sell them to medical schools and private collectors. A complete human skeleton could fetch a significant sum, especially if it was properly prepared and mounted. The process was gruesome but profitable. Holmes would carefully remove organs and tissue, sometimes preserving them in jars for his own twisted collection or for sale to medical institutions. He would bleach and polish bones until they gleamed white, then wire them together in anatomically correct positions. Holmes also discovered that some of his victims possessed valuable items that could be sold or kept as trophies. Jewelry, clothing, personal photographs, and family heirlooms would all disappear into his private collection. He would sometimes wear pieces of jewelry that had belonged to his victims or display their photographs in his office as if they were friends or family members. As months passed, Holmes refined his techniques and expanded his operations. He began targeting male victims as well, particularly traveling businessmen who were in Chicago for the fair. These men would check into his hotel for what they believed would be a short stay, only to find themselves trapped in the same deadly maze that had claimed so many others. The scope of Holmes's operation was staggering. While the exact number of his victims may never be known, evidence suggests that dozens of people died in his castle during the World's Fair period alone. Each death was carefully planned and executed, with Holmes treating murder as simply another business transaction to be optimized for maximum profit. As 1893 drew to a close and the World's Fair began winding down, Holmes had perfected his system of death and disposal. He had turned murder into a profitable enterprise, combining insurance fraud, theft, and the sale of human remains into a comprehensive business model that generated steady income while satisfying his psychological need to kill. But even the most sophisticated criminal enterprise has weaknesses, and Holmes's web of lies and false identities was about to begin unraveling in ways he never anticipated. The end began with a single insurance policy that Holmes couldn't resist pushing too far. His business partner, Benjamin Pitezel, had become a liability, someone who knew too much about the castle's operations and was growing increasingly nervous about their arrangement. But Benjamin also represented one final opportunity for a massive payday that Holmes found impossible to ignore. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity. Benjamin would fake his own death. Holmes would collect on a $10,000 life insurance policy, and they would split the proceeds before disappearing to start fresh somewhere else. It was the kind of con they had pulled before on a smaller scale, but this time, Holmes had no intention of sharing anything with anyone. On September 4th, 1894, Benjamin Pitezel was found dead in his Philadelphia office, apparently killed in a laboratory explosion. The scene looked exactly like an accident, complete with burned equipment and chemical residue that explained the condition of the body. Holmes arrived shortly after, playing the role of the grieving business partner perfectly. He identified the remains, helped arrange the funeral, and began the process of filing the insurance claim. But Holmes had made a critical error. In his eagerness to collect the full amount, he had actually killed Benjamin instead of staging a fake death. The insurance company, suspicious of the convenient timing and substantial payout, hired detectives to investigate the claim more thoroughly than Holmes had anticipated. Meanwhile, Holmes had convinced Benjamin's widow that her husband was still alive and in hiding until the insurance money came through. He offered to help care for her children while she waited, taking 3 of them with him on what he claimed was a necessary journey to collect evidence that would help secure the payout. Alice, Nellie, and Howard trusted the charming doctor who had been their father's partner, never suspecting that he had already murdered the man they were waiting to see again. Holmes's movements during this period became increasingly erratic. He traveled from city to city with the children, staying in hotels under false names and constantly changing his plans. In Toronto, he rented a house and told the children they would finally be reunited with their father. Instead, he led Alice and Nellie to the basement and locked them in a large trunk, where they slowly suffocated while he sat upstairs writing letters. Howard Pitezel had already been killed days earlier, his body dismembered and burned in the fireplace of another rented house. The insurance investigation was closing in faster than Holmes realized. Detectives had identified inconsistencies in his story and were tracking his movements across multiple states. They had also discovered that the man claiming to be Henry Holmes was actually Herman Webster Mudgett, a doctor who had left medical school under suspicious circumstances and had been using false identities for years. When Holmes was finally arrested in Boston in November 1894, the full scope of his crimes began to emerge. Police searches of the castle revealed the horrific truth about what had been happening just blocks from the World's Fair. The maze-like interior, the gas pipes controlled from Holmes's office, the crematorium in the basement, and the acid vats all told a story that shocked even experienced investigators. Newspaper reporters flocked to Chicago to cover what quickly became known as the Murder Castle case. The contrast between the gleaming white city of the World's Fair and the house of horrors that Holmes had constructed captivated the public imagination. The trial that followed was a media sensation. Holmes represented himself for part of the proceedings, displaying the same charm and confidence that had allowed him to lure so many victims to their deaths. He spun elaborate stories, claimed innocence, and even confessed to murders that investigators knew he couldn't have committed, apparently unable to resist the attention that his notoriety brought him. On May 7, 1896, Herman Webster Mudgett, the man who had called himself H. H. Holmes, was hanged at Moyamensing Prison in Philadelphia. His final words were a request that his body be buried in concrete to prevent anyone from stealing it for medical research. A fitting end for someone who had profited from dismembering his victims and selling their remains. The murder castle itself met a similarly dramatic end. In August 1895, while Holmes sat in jail awaiting trial, the building mysteriously caught fire and was completely gutted. Whether the fire was set by angry neighbors, vengeful family members of victims, or someone trying to destroy evidence, it ensured that Holmes's architectural monument to murder would never again serve its terrible purpose. In the end, while cowboys rode off into Hollywood immortality, Holmes's story serves as a reminder that the most dangerous predators are often the ones we never see coming. They don't wear black hats or announce their intentions with gunfights at high noon. They shake your hand with a warm smile, offer you a job, and invite you inside, where the real horrors begin as soon as the doors close.